Viktor Orbán has a really serious problem on his hands.
Viktor Orbán is behind by double-digit percentage points.
See, for the first time in 16 long years, the Hungarian Prime Minister actually faces down the barrel of a very real possibility that he might just lose the upcoming election scheduled for April 12, 2026, and his governing Fidesz party is panicking. And what does an increasingly isolated autocratic leader do when the polls turn against him? Of course, he comes up with a massive national security crisis that might just be enough for him to call the entire democratic system off and thereby cancel even the votes that he might just be about to lose. This is Prague Pulse, and in this quick episode, which will be the first one in a mini-series on the Hungarian election, we take a look at this possible false flag operation carried out by Viktor Orbán to cancel or postpone the election, and at just how likely he might be about to do just that. Now, to understand why exactly Viktor Orbán and Fidesz are panicking so much and so suddenly, we have to take a look at the numbers first. See, for years now, Fidesz and Orbán have actually relied on a heavily biased political system and a very fragmented opposition that have enabled them to stay in power since 2010. And to make the system even more profitable to them, they've also pushed through a number of very controversial constitutional reforms that have basically given sort of bonus points to Fidesz in any election that the party has decided to stand at. And on top of it all, as you would probably also expect, Fidesz has also installed party loyalists in all major state institutions, and that combination of factors has basically made the party untouchable in Hungarian politics, and for years now. But the Hungarian political landscape seems to have shifted dramatically in recent months, as it seems the Tisza party of Péter Magyar might just be about to unseat the Orban government after all those years. Independent polling from late March and early April actually shows the Tisza party of Péter Magyar leading Fidesz anywhere between 11 to 19%. It doesn't even matter which pollster you ask, all of them basically agree that Tisza is about to defeat Fidesz. Just take a look at the numbers. This of course doesn't apply to government-affiliated media and agencies. Those still claim that Fidesz is about to clinch that election. But even they had to admit in recent days that Tisza has at least closed the gap to Fidesz substantially, and that alone would have been unthinkable just a few months back. So basically all sources, no matter if government-affiliated or independent, agree that at the very least, Tisza will be a serious contender in that election. And that is a serious problem for the government, because that's something that they haven't seen for 16 years. So that exactly is the context in which Orbán and Fidesz have been panicking so much, and they've been trying to find a creative way to stay in power should the independent polling prove true at next week's vote. And luckily for Orbán, and I guess unfortunately for democracy and all of us, Orbán may just have the legal infrastructure to bend the rules to his liking. Let's take a look. Ever since the COVID pandemic, so basically ever since 2020, Orbán has actually governed within a state of national emergency, and that state of national emergency actually applies even until this day. And that system enables him to govern via emergency decrees, basically entirely bypassing the Hungarian government and governing on his own, like a dictator. Of course, you might rightly say that the pandemic actually ended long ago, but Orbán still has those wide-ranging powers at his disposal even today. Now, before we continue, I actually have a quick challenge for you. It is actually my goal to reach the first 1,000 subscribers on this channel by the end of June 2026, and we're already so close. So if you like these deep dives and want to support an independent creator like me beat the YouTube algorithm, which is becoming more difficult by the minute, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It is very quick, doesn't cost you anything, and it helps me enormously. And now, back to Hungary. So now that we've seen the powers that Orbán still has, what exactly is his plan to derail this election? Well, this Sunday, so exactly 1 week ahead of the vote, he announced that Aleksandar Vučić, the Serbian president, called him with some terrifying news. With great fanfare, Orbán actually announced that the Serbian authorities had found explosive devices and detonators in the immediate proximity to the gas pipeline connecting Serbia to Hungary, and he labeled it an attack on the country. Of course, he immediately convened an emergency session of the National Defense Council to deal with this alleged sabotage attempt. And at the same time, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson and the proven liar Maria Zakharova, of course, stood by Hungary and called it an attack on Hungarian sovereignty, an attack orchestrated by the West. I mean, of course that the Russian war criminals would support Hungary in all this. No surprises there, seeing as Hungary has basically been acting like a Russian puppet all along. According to the recent revelations by investigative journalists, Hungary has been supplying confidential information from the EU straight to the Kremlin, so of course that the Russians would now support the Hungarians in all this. But whatever. See, that's actually not even the main issue with this sabotage tale. The main issue is that journalists and experts have actually called it days ago. Already on April 2nd, sources close to the Fidesz government and Orban himself revealed that the government was planning exactly this kind of a false flag operation to disrupt the election. And they also predicted correctly that it would take place in Serbia. Apparently, investigative journalists had this exact information weeks ago already. And it's also not surprising that this alleged attack took place in Serbia and not directly in Hungary. Orban is basically absolving himself of any responsibility, and it of course makes it much more difficult for independent experts, for example, to verify the claim in any way. But that doesn't matter to Orban because it still gives him the exact crisis that he might need to disrupt the election. So what exactly is the end game? What exactly may Orban be planning? Well, the way I see it, he basically has three options. Option 1 is probably the most extreme one. See, under the 10th amendment of the Hungarian constitution, which the Fidesz government pushed through in 2022, right at the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the government can actually declare a state of danger in case of a humanitarian crisis in a neighboring country. And an attack on a gas pipeline in Serbia fits that bill perfectly. Combine that with the precedents set during the pandemic that enables Orban to govern through the decrees without the parliament, and we have a deadly cocktail. In this extreme case, Orban may basically simply declare that the crisis is too severe for any sort of election to take place and postpone it indefinitely. If this option of cancelling the election altogether is seen as too risky even for Orban, for example for the fear of losing access to EU funds, which are critical to Orban even though he claims it's not the case, he might resort to option 2 instead. Under option 2, he wouldn't cancel the election altogether, but he would do everything he can to disrupt it as much as possible in this final week of campaigning. For example, again using the emergency powers that he's had ever since the pandemic, he could ban any sort of opposition gatherings and thereby make it more difficult for Tisza to clench those last-minute votes. And he could possibly even impose severe restrictions on independent media for threatening national security, going back to that fabricated false flag operation in Serbia. And that, limiting the media, could in turn make it more difficult for them to report on possible successes of Tisza or questioning the story of the explosives. And then we have option 3. See, even if Tisza wins, it's not game over for Fidesz still. Because even if Tisza manages to win, that still leaves us with at least several more weeks of the so-called transition period. So that's the time before Tisza manages to formally take over from Fidesz. And in that transition period, Fidesz would still hold its massive 2/3 majority in parliament. And you can do a lot with a 2/3 majority. For example, you can change the constitution so that governing for Tisza is much more difficult. Or you can label some existing laws as constitutional laws, thereby making it close to impossible for Tisza to change them or repeal them. And that's exactly how Fidesz could make sure that some of the very controversial laws, such as those governing media independence, or rather the lack thereof, or judicial independence, would stay in place even if Orban is long gone, because Tisza simply wouldn't have the power to do anything about it. And we're not even done here, of course, because over the long years of governing, Orban has also managed to install Fidesz loyalists into the courts. And that could hypothetically mean that, for example, it takes a long time for the courts where Fidesz people have been installed to officially certify the election result. And until that official certification happens, Fidesz again can continue in power and has more time to, for example, change the system, change the constitution, and make lives of Tisza much more difficult. The point is, even if Orban loses, he still has many ways to complicate the lives of any potential opposition that could take over. Let's just see which of the potential strategies he chooses and whether or not he goes for the nuclear option, which would of course be cancelling the election altogether. The situation in Budapest is moving incredibly fast. Just yesterday, Orban held that emergency defense council meeting, and we still don't know what he decides to do in that crucial last week of campaigning. But one thing is absolutely certain. We're going to be following the situation closely, so don't forget to like this video and subscribe so that you don't miss it, because as I said, this was only the first in a mini-series on the Hungarian election, so stay tuned because there's a lot more coming. This has been Jan with Prague Pulse, and see you very soon.